Okay, so the question was, what about broadcast spectrum and its allocation in the United States? First observation is that we have historically tended to allocate narrow pieces of spectrum and then dedicate them to a particular application. Part of that was driven by the crappy receivers and transmitters that we had available. And I listened to, I'm dropping a name right now, and I can't. This is a guy who's at the University of Colorado and spent several tours of duty at the FCC, and his name is just not sticking in my head. He made the point recently that we should be thinking about making better receivers rather than pressing people on the transmission side to keep them in narrow bands because the receivers were too wide open. If we had specs or constraints on the receivers, we could do a better job of frequency utilization. But that's not where I end up. Where I end up is wanting very much to work on shared spectrum. I want very much to see us open up bandwidth that's accessible to more than one application and more than one transceiver, and then share the spectrum. If you took a spectrometer and you looked at how much utilization is there of the actual spectrum we've allocated, it might be 2% utilized at any moment. And so we waste it. We waste all these bits per second that we could be sending. So by building better transceivers, smarter transceivers, software-defined radios, we can do a much better job of actually sharing common spectrum, especially if it's wideband, because we can use spread spectrum methods to keep signal levels low. So I'm a big fan of pushing very hard into that space rather than slicing it up in narrow bands. Now, I know that we're not there, but my impression right now is that the White House has this policy for exploring broadband use of the spectrum. If you talk to Anish Chopra, for example, the CTO, he's very voluble about the idea of reallocating or at least exploring ways to allocate spectrum. When we get up into the 60 gigahertz bands, where you can get very, very broadband spectrum, because it's not assigned yet, you could get it some pretty interesting applications. The only problem is at 60 gigahertz, the oxygen absorbs the signal in about half a mile, which is great for the CIA, but it may not be wonderful for some of the other applications. On the other hand, if you've heard of femtocells, the idea here is to radiate in small amounts of power at extremely high speeds locally and then reuse the spectrum. That's another way of sharing, is to reuse it. So I'd like to see more applications that share spectrum and more reuse of spectrum architecturally. Say again?
Would cognitive radios fall into that area?
Yeah, if you would consider a software-defined radio and a cognitive radio to be more or less the same thing, yes. And here the idea is that you're aware of what's going on in the spectrum, you're detecting other transmitters, you're leaping out of bands that are already occupied, you're using all the various modularities, whether it's chipping spread spectrum, or frequency hopping, or polarization, or different kinds of modulation. Use every possible trick you can play to share the spectrum with other players.